Welcome all. Happy New Year's. First and foremost, hopefully we all went into the New Year's with a bang. Hopefully you had a great day, and I wish you and your families the very, very best. Now, let's get to it. We posted a question yesterday. Who is more at fault for Mr. Pete Alonso not being signed? Pete Alonso or Scott Boras? Who shoulders more of the blame? Well, about 500 of you chimed in, and it went 60-40 in favor of Mr. Scott Boras, who deserves more of the blame. Well, I was thinking about that question, and 60-40, decent breakdown, but I should have put a third option. Scott Boras should have been one option. Pete Alonso should have been one option, but I should have had option number three, which was both of them. And I think it would have been a very fair breakdown, very fair breakdown. But all right, that was interesting data. Thank you for voting and chiming in on that. All right. So today we have some more hypothetical questions I like to kind of get into and share some news. John Heyman reports about Pete Alonso and what is going on, what may be hindering the deal with the New York Mets. Also, we're going to get into a little bit about Alex Bregman because I think is that potentially affecting the Pete Alonso negotiation. A very fair question we need to ask. But here's my question to you folks. How many of you are kind of alarmed that Pete Alonso is really adamant about getting that long-term contract right now? Right now. He wants at 5, 6, in the beginning of the year, he wanted 7, 8 years, right? Now I think he's more settled on the belief that he'll get a 5 or 6 year deal. But as we've seen in the past, when a market is not there, normally a guy will sign that, contract, maybe 2 or 3 year contract, nice money. Pete Alonso had that 3 year, $90 million contract. He'd be paid the highest paid first baseman at 30 mil every year. And then he has the opportunity to test the market after year one, after year two, and even after year three. He'll only be 33 years old. So, if he wants that to be, initially want to be paid 7, 8 years, he should have plenty of time to have two contracts. Plenty of time to have two contracts. But with that opt out after year one, he can opt out next season. But how many of us are alarmed that Pete Alonso doesn't even want to deal with that, doesn't even want to look in that direction when so many of other players have done that and have been successful? Most recent, Matt Chapman and Blake Snell. So it happens, and if you believe in yourself and you are confident in your abilities, then that is what you usually do. I know some of us may say, hey, you know what? It is Pete's right to ask for whatever he wants. And that is true. But at this point right now, there are not many teams left standing. I mean, you could say the Mets. You could say the D-backs. I mean, as of a couple of days ago, you can even say the Nationals, but they got Josh Bell. So the teams are really dwindling down. And of the few remaining teams, I don't really foresee any other team blowing Pete away. So it's really the Mets bidding against themselves, right? So how much sense does it really make for the Mets to say, hey, Pete, here's another 2 or 3 years and here's another $80 million? Doesn't make much sense at all. I mean, if Scott Boras and Pete Alonso, Scott Boras says, hey, there's 2 or 3 other teams interested. One team's got 5 years on the table. One team's got 6. Yeah, then maybe the Mets counter at because of the market bears a higher offer if you want Pete Alonso, right? So yeah, that's what I feel about that. And the New York Mets, you got to give them kind of credit because as much as you want, you would want Pete to be with the Mets, and some of us do. They really want Pete to be with the Mets. The Mets have shown interest in Pete throughout. 7 year contract last year offered. Pete turned it down. Then he turns down this year as well. 3 years, $90 million. And the Mets, they could have pivoted elsewhere. They could have pivoted in so many different directions. But instead of getting another first baseman, they said, you know what? We want Mr. Pete Alonso. and we'll figure it out. Is Pete Alonso a typical David Stearns guy? I would say no. I would say no. But I think Steve Cohen having that relationship with Pete Alonso goes a long way. Hey, David Stearns works for Steve Cohen. Want to make the big guy happy? Then throughout the years, maybe David Stearns sees a couple redeeming qualities in Pete, says, okay, you know what? I could work with the guy, came up clutch in the playoffs, at the right price, the right amount, that's fine. Now, let's get into what John Heyman says because I think that is the crux of what is going on. So, why isn't Pete Alonso signed? I mean, we are in January, we're in 2025, right? We are in the tail end of free agency. There's a couple big ones left, a couple big free agents, but for the most part, many free agents have their homes. Many free agents have their homes. So, according to John Heyman of the New York Post, the New York Mets and free agent Pete Alonso remain apart in contract negotiations, Heyman noted. But I think the hangup right now, according to John Heyman, when discussing the current state of negotiation, is contract length. He says that in terms of years, in terms of money each year, that's fine. Salary per year is no problem. It's years that the Mets are hesitant to give out to Alonso. And you know what, folks? When you get to a 5 year contract, we're talking about a long term commitment. And I've said this 3 or 4 times in the last week, the average age that a first baseman typically declines is 31 and 32. Pete Alonso is 30, folks. Turned 30 beginning of December. And this is notable. Turned 30 in the beginning of December. By the time we get to April, he'll be at almost 30 and a half. When we get to playoffs, he will be close to 31. He will be practically a 31-year-old. So it's not like Pete is going to be playing the year as a young 30-year-old, folks. You are getting practically a 30 and a half-year-old, almost 31-year-old by the time we get to the playoffs. So even if you sign him and remember, I said players usually decline at 31, 32. Pete Alonso has already shown some notable decline. But even if you think it's just a blip in the radar, but we'll go with historical data. Guys decline 31, 32. Pete's going to be 31 years old by playoff time in his first year. So if you give him a 5 or 6 year deal, I mean, that's silly. That's silly. Even a 4 year deal has its risk. If you think that he's going to be done after 31, you're going to have 3 years of bad production or 3 years of less than production. If you're going to pay the guy around 30 million, you're going to waste that salary. You could better use that money, allocate it to a more useful place, possibly pitching. You got guys coming up, you got hitters, you got a Ryan Clifford. And as you saw this offseason, there are a slew of first baseman options every year. Every year. First baseman, unfortunately for Mr. Pete Alonso, is one of the worst positions to get paid at. I'm sorry. And if you're a guy who is unathletic and a guy who, is not a defensive, he's not a Keith Hernandez, and it's tough. It's tough. Now, and there's many different aspects to where we are right now, and let me just tell you what's going on inside of my head, and you can kind of tell me what you think. First of all, we are recording. It is at 4:40 in the morning. This is January 2nd. So hit that like button, subscribe, but can't sleep right now. Like, yeah, I got a very sick dog, so hoping the dog gets better. A little Yorkie, so I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with her, but hoping she gets better. So we just taking care of her a few moments ago and figured I'd speak to you. But here's the deal. Pete Alonso has built a lot of credibility with the New York Mets fans. A lot. Going into the 2023 season. So going in last year when we signed Verlander and we were coupling him with Max Scherzer, we were all excited. 2023 was supposed to be a magical season where we have our two frontline aces, although aging. We have we thought we had what we needed to make a legitimate run. First 2 months of the season, very, not great, but not bad either. Not bad either. Then June comes. June was just horrible. And I think one of the most horrible things that happened was Pete Alonso getting hit on the wrist by Charlie Morton. He was having a very phenomenal year up until then. He was on a pace to hit 60 home runs. I mean, Pete was really doing well, right? So then he comes back early, and he doesn't do so well. In fact, he had a pathetic, very bad, one of his worst months in history. I think he came back early, but you know what? That's besides the point. Then you heard at the 2023 deadline that there were rumors that Pete could possibly be traded. They were very small rumors, very small rumors. Of course, Pete didn't get traded. He hit 46 home runs in 2023. You know what? Decent year, very decent year considering he got hurt. Then 2024 came, and before 2024, we all learned that Pete was offered a contract of 7 years, 156 million or 158, around 160 million. So I'm like, that's a very, I would say, fair contract. That was about where Matt Olson was paid, per year, and he has that paycheck for 7 years, $160 million. Could have became a lifetime Met. He would have played up until age 36. I'm like, okay, the Mets at the back end, I understand what they're doing, lower AAV, but you signed a guy for 7 years, lifetime Met. Pete Alonso apparently rejects that offer and says, you know what? Not only am I going to reject that offer, I am going to get a mega agent, Scott Boras. So then I'm like, wow, $160 million. He basically, poo-pooed that. Not good enough. And I'm like, you think maybe he would give the New York Mets the color, the team that he bleeds orange and blue for, maybe that hometown discount, even if there was a discount at that point, right? Um, and you could argue that's what he was worth. He was worth around with the market bared, Matt Olson, Freddie Freeman. They got contracts in the realm of that, the range of that, probably a little more closer to the Matt Olson contract, but that's probably where Pete Alonso slides in, right around there in terms of player rank, but he turned it down. All right, so in the beginning of 2024, I was a little upset. I'm like, you know what? Who does this guy think he is? Then you hear this guy, he wants to get paid like Aaron Judge. I'm like, you know what? If he wants to get paid like Aaron Judge, he better go out there and have a superstar season. He wants to get paid like a superstar. Fine. Go out there, have a superstar season. And, I'm pretty sure Steve Cohen and the New York Mets will have, they'll pay you. They'll pay you if you're worth it. All right. So then, Pete goes on. He goes on to really struggle, really struggle. Swinging at pitches 2 feet outside, striking out in key situations, running and scoring position. He is hitting horrible, hitting into key ground balls. But then as we get near the All-Star break, you hear that Pete Alonso puts I forgot to put on X, but he put it out there that if he makes the All-Star team, he will go in the home run derby. I'm like, all right, who the hell cares? Who the hell cares? But lo and behold, makes the All-Star game, goes to the home run derby, does pathetic, very horrible. He was the worst performer in that home run derby. All right, as time progresses, the media start to get on Pete and says, Pete, what do you think about your struggles this year? Then Pete goes on to say, hey, what do you talk about my struggles? I'm an all-star this year, and I'm going to be set to hit 40 home runs. At this point, I think he was around 20 home runs with like a third of the season to go. He was on pace for like 32, 33 home runs, right around what he ended up getting. But the thing is, it was a very selfish statement. It shouldn't be about like what all your accomplishments are. The team was in a very important, we were in a hunt to be a playoff team, and Pete is just worried about his numbers. Then the season went on, and Pete, didn't have a Pete Alonso like season. And you know what? He was healthy this year. I'll give him that. But also, he was playing for that contract. Pete Alonso this year, folks, played in 162 games. Pete Alonso this year hit 34 home runs in he had the most at bats and played in the most games in his career. Pete Alonso this year was a compiler. He was a compiler. He hit 34 home runs because he played the most out of anybody in all of MLB, and he hit 34 home runs. Do you know in 2019 when he hit 53 home runs, he had less at bats? Not by a lot, not by a lot. He played in 161 games, but it's an interesting fact that he hit almost 20 home runs less, 200 points less than the OPS. It's Pete Alonso from 2019 went here in 2024. There was a steady decline from 2023 to 2024, and now Pete wants to be paid like he's still up here. What I said about that average trajectory of players, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're Albert Pujols, if you're Miguel Cabrera, if you're Todd Helton, if you're Adrian Gonzalez, there are a lot of greats. Ryan Howard, I wouldn't say he's a great, but he's a great home run hitter. A lot of guys after 31 years old fall off a cliff. Like I mentioned, Pete Alonso will be 31 at the end of year one. At the end of year one. The Mets giving him that 3-year, $90 million life preserver when there's no market out there is a blessing. A blessing. Now, I put out that poll question. Whose fault is it more? 500 of you answered. Thank you so much. And it was 60-40. You blame it more on Boris. But it was close, 60-40, 60-40. 40% of you think it's Pete's fault. And I'm pretty sure I got my answer. Most of you think it's both of them's fault. Most of you think it's both. If it's 60-40, that's what I can grasp. But at the end of the day, Pete Alonso has the decision to do whatever he so pleases. He turned down an offer last year with a different agent. This year, he turned down a very fair offer with a much higher average annual value. With the first offer, he'd be paid $22 million a year, excuse me. And this year, he would be paid $30 million a year with this latest offer. So it's very interesting dynamic. It's a very interesting dynamic. And, like I mentioned, the New York Mets could have pivoted elsewhere. They could have pivoted in many cheaper directions. They could have went to Christian Walker. They could have went elsewhere, but they reserved a spot for Mr. Pete Alonso. Mr. Pete Alonso. I mean, they could have pulled a Freddie Freeman. They could have traded for a guy like, Matt Olson, or could have traded for another first baseman and said, you know what? You don't want us? That's fine. But, the New York Mets have been very loyal to Pete. In fact, this is where we get to Alex Bregman. I think the Mets potentially want both of them, right? And I also think that Alex Bregman has interest in going to the Mets. I really do. But I think out of respect, the Mets want to have Pete Alonso in tow first. In tow first. That's what I think. But if you look at it from the other side, if you look at it from the Scott Boras side, Scott Boras represents both Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso. I mean, is there, I wonder if there's some type of trouble in terms of who he would prefer, Scott Boras, who he would prefer signs first. Like if, for example, if the New York Mets end up signing Alex Bregman, does that tank the value of Pete Alonso? Because if you think about it, then now the New York Mets have Alex Bregman to play third. Vientos can go to first, and then they can go to a cheaper option, DH. Right? That's an option. And now the Mets can really play hardball with Pete Alonso. So is Boras strategically kind of saying, you know what, Alex, hold back a second. We have deals for you. We need Pete Alonso to go first. Because, like I said, I think Alex signing with the Mets would tank the Pete Alonso market. That's just a theory that I have. What do you think about that? Because I believe Alex Bregman does have he does have suitors. I'm not saying he's got a slew, but you see the Detroit Tigers out there. One or two other teams besides the Mets are out there. But whereas the New York Mets are the only suitor that offered Pete Alonso a contract, at least that I've heard. I mean, if some team did an under the table deal, then that's another story. That's another story. Well, I wonder why Pete Alonso and Scott Boras right now kind of so bold. Are they waiting for like a potential injury to happen? Because I don't think there's anything. Anything can happen. I don't think there's anything that can happen that would change Pete Alonso's market. I don't think. Even if Freddie Freeman got hurt on the Dodgers in spring training, I don't think that would say, hey, let's go out and sign Pete Alonso for $200 million. It's just not good business. It's just not good business. I don't know what Scott Boras and Pete Alonso are waiting for. You have a very fair, unless here's one caveat. We've heard the 3-year, $90 million deal confirmed by many different sources. But at the end of the day, could that be wrong? Could that be wrong? Could that $90 million deal not be accurate? That's the only thing that would really make sense right now, because if you think about it, it was a very fair deal to offer in this specific market climate. Give the guy $30 million, make him the highest paid first baseman. I don't know, Pete. I really don't know, especially coming off of the 2024 year. But, as we sum it up, it's been a very disappointing year if you're a fan of Mr. Pete Alonso. Turning down the seven-year, $158 million deal, the very selfish comments around the All-Star game, the very selfish comments when asked about his production thus far in the middle of 2024. And then you hear him turn down a very fair offer. Like, the market has spoken. Pete Alonso has the ability to ask whatever he wants in the beginning. But once the market has spoken, I think you do a certain amount of damage to yourself by continually rejecting fair offers. Fair offers. I could say if the Mets offered him a 2-year, $30 million deal, rejected any day, all day, every day. Rejected all day, every day. That is not fair to Mr. Pete Alonso. But when they make you the highest paid first baseman, maybe next year Vladdy will be the highest, but you'll still be in the top 3 for at least 3 years. So it's very I don't think it's a good look for Pete. I don't think it's a good look. There will be Pete Alonso fans that will say, hey, he deserves it no matter what. But I think there are a lot of realistic fans that understand what the market dynamics are, what Pete Alonso's value is going to be going into his 30s. We're not paying for a 24-year-old Pete. We're not paying for a 25-year-old Pete. We're paying for a guy who is going into his 30s. You're going to get him for age 31, 32, 33 if you sign him for 3 years. If you sign for 4 or 5 years, you're getting him for way more of that, mid 30s, which we don't want any part of. We don't want any part of. Now, Pete can go out there, ball, have a magical season, magical couple seasons. And if he signs that 3-year contract, he could sign another contract at the end of 3 years. If he signs this specific contract, he'll have the ability to opt out over and over and over and over. So, folks, it is a little alarming. But at the end of the day, whether Pete Alonso decides he wants to go to the New York Mets, the Mets will be okay. The Mets will be okay. I think for the New York Mets, the biggest question will be, when do the Mets turn the page? When do the Mets move on? So, I think the Mets can do something like this. If Pete Alonso decides to really wait this out, wait this out into spring training, the Mets can do this pivot. The Mets could sign an Alex Bregman. I think he's the best available hitter on the market. Not home run hitter, pure hitter, guy who has, very level swing, a guy who is a great defensive third baseman. And Alex Bregman, you'd get him if you can get him on like a 4-year contract, 3, 4 year contract. Anything longer than that, that's a very iffy situation as well. So you get him on a 3, 4 year contract, plug him in at third, slate Mark Vientos to go to first base. Then what you're going to do is you're not going to keep yourself out of the Alonso market, but you have that extra bat, right? You have that DH position, available. You can always put Vientos to DH, Pete Alonso to first. But keep that flexibility open. Keep that flexibility open. Or if you want to make that home run move, you always have the ability to trade for Vladdy Guerrero Jr. Then you put Bregman third, Vientos goes to DH, and then you have Guerrero at first. But I expect the Mets to make moves, to get aggressive and make moves. It's really all about timing. All about timing. At this point right now, we are, probably at a B minus offseason. The Mets can compete, but we have a lot of work to do. We have relievers. We have some star relievers still available, but it's all about timing, folks. And I know heading into the new year, you'd like the rotation to be better. You'd like us to get a couple more bats in tow, a DH, first baseman. Specifically, you'd like us to get a couple more relief pitching options. But I think those will eventually come. Those will eventually come. And I find things comical because as I do my research, you see a lot of kind of pro Pete articles out there, a lot of pro Pete articles, and I don't like the Mets being bashed in this Pete Alonso situation because, as I will repeat, video after video after video, they are the only ones respecting Pete at all. I mean, this one article that came out by Forbes magazine goes, New York Mets spent $917.25 million, but not on slugger Pete Alonso. So it really goes down how the Mets have given a 15-year, $765 million contract to said Juan Soto, the money they gave to Sean Manaea, Clay Holmes, Montaz, Griffin Canning, Jared Young, Dylan Covey, Justin Hagerman, and the list kind of goes on and on. But nothing with Pete Alonso. But, here's the deal. We know that the New York Mets are really far from over. This is a far from over situation for our New York Mets. So it's really hard to kind of judge them right now when their season and the off season is not over. So, folks, we are going to end things right here. Thank you so much. Have yourself a great day.